It started with a whisper, one phone call that shattered the calm of Montecito. Prince Harry, pacing through the gardens of his California mansion, had no idea that a storm was brewing across the Atlantic. A former staff member from Meghan's royal days had just broken their silence. What began as a quiet confession would soon become a scandal that threatened to upend everything Harry believed about his wife, his family, and the truth they built their empire upon. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The serenity of Montecito had always been Harry's refuge. The chirping birds, the quiet hum of the ocean breeze, the illusion of peace. Yet that morning, as the message from London began to circulate through discreet royal channels, calm turned to chaos. The anonymous whistleblower wasn't just anyone, they were a former insider with direct access to Meghan during her earliest days at the palace. For years, they had remained silent, loyal even when others weren't. But silence, they claimed, was no longer an option. Something inside the palace walls had haunted them for too long, and now it was time to speak. Across the Atlantic, British tabloids began to stir. Cryptic headlines appeared overnight. Former royal staffer breaks years of silence, a phrase that instantly reignited curiosity and suspicion. The palace's press office stayed quiet, refusing to confirm or deny, which only made the story grow louder. And as the world speculated about what could possibly be so damaging, one name kept resurfacing: Meghan Markle. For Harry, still asleep in California, it was just another sunrise. For the monarchy, it was the beginning of something far darker. Inside the palace corridors, the staffer's words had already traveled like wildfire. Whispered conversations in royal offices turned into silent meetings behind closed doors. Some feared the truth being revealed. Others feared the consequences of yet another royal crisis. What no one knew yet was that this revelation wasn't about gossip or petty grievances. It was about something tangible, something written, a secret that could contradict years of interviews, memoirs, and emotional confessions. Harry's morning began as it always did, with a walk through the garden and a cup of coffee. But as he glanced at his phone, the stillness broke. A string of missed calls from unknown UK numbers flashed across the screen. Then came a message, not from Buckingham, not from a friend, but from a name he hadn't seen in years. A name tied to Meghan's past life, within the palace walls. The message was brief, but chilling. You need to know the truth before the world does. In that instant, Harry's calm vanished. The world around him blurred as questions flooded his mind. What truth? Whose truth? And why now? The call wasn't random, it was deliberate, a warning. And as he tried to piece together what it could mean, one thing became certain. The peace he had built in California was about to crumble under the weight of secrets he didn't even know existed. But as dawn broke in California, Harry's phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. It wasn't from the palace. It was from someone far closer to Meghan's past. In a locked drawer of Kensington Palace, a confidential letter had once been hidden, sealed, stamped, and forgotten. The former staffer claimed they knew what was written inside. Meghan's private correspondence that contradicted her most public claims. For years, it remained buried under layers of secrecy. Until now. The letter resurfaced, and with it, every lie Meghan thought she'd buried began to unravel. The revelation of the letter didn't come through tabloids or royal aides, it came directly from the same staffer who had first sounded the alarm. With a trembling voice, they recounted how Meghan, late into the night during her early months at Kensington Palace, had dictated a message to be sent to an unnamed confidant. It was meant to remain private, a raw and unfiltered reflection of her feelings about royal life. But what startled the world wasn't the existence of the letter, it was what it revealed. Within its pages lay words that stripped away the carefully crafted image of victimhood Meghan had presented to the world. The letter, they said, was not written by a woman silenced by the crown, but by someone calculating her next move. According to the staffer, Meghan had insisted on writing every word by hand, sealing it herself, and making sure no one else would ever see it. But the same staffer, present that night, remembered the tone cold, strategic, and disturbingly confident. She spoke not as a trapped duchess, but as someone mapping a path out of the monarchy while preserving the appearance of innocence. The letter, they said, spoke about her frustration with protocol, her desire to reshape perception, and her understanding of what public sympathy could achieve. These phrases were not the words of someone misunderstood, they were the notes of a plan. When the former staffer handed the information to a trusted journalist, the media world froze. If true, it meant Meghan's most emotional interviews, her tearful claims of isolation and cruelty, had been shadowed by a private acknowledgement that she knew exactly how those narratives would play. Reporters who had once defended her began digging deeper, hunting for verification. Palace insiders stayed quiet, yet whispers grew louder that the letter wasn't just rumor, it had been archived once, deep within royal correspondence, before mysteriously disappearing after her departure. Harry, upon hearing the claim, dismissed it immediately. To him, it was unthinkable that Meghan would write something so manipulative. He had built his new life defending her truth, standing against his own blood to protect her reputation. But this felt like a crack forming beneath his feet. Those close to the Sussexes described him as shaken but silent. He refused to read any leaked excerpts, yet could not ignore the dread creeping into his voice each time a headline mentioned the hidden letter. Meanwhile, the press prepared for war. Every newsroom wanted a copy. Every producer wanted the exclusive. Analysts speculated what this meant for Meghan's credibility, and more importantly, for Harry's trust in her. The palace, while publicly silent, began reviewing old communication records. And somewhere within those dusty archives, rumors suggested, the sealed envelope was once again in royal hands, ready to be unsealed if the situation demanded it. The world watched as the tension reached its peak, uncertain whether this letter would ever be seen by the public. But one thing was certain, it had already changed everything. For the first time, even Harry seemed uncertain of the truth he had sworn to protect. And as journalists sharpened their headlines, the one person who could confirm or deny the letter's authenticity stepped into the light someone Harry once trusted like family. She was once Meghan's shadow, her assistant, confidant, and protector. But after years of silence, she decided the truth could no longer be buried. In a private interview that quickly went public, Meghan's former aide revealed the emotional manipulation, the palace meltdowns, and the web of deception that even senior royals had ignored. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the unmasking of a woman who had rewritten her own fairy tale. The former aide had been there from the beginning, through the rehearsed smiles, the tense briefings, and the quiet tears behind gilded doors. She had stood beside Meghan during her transformation, from actress to duchess, witnessing firsthand the evolution of a woman who once claimed to be overwhelmed by royal pressure. But according to the aide, what unfolded behind the scenes was nothing like the narrative the world had been led to believe. She described Meghan as brilliant, persuasive, and dangerously self-assured, someone who understood the power of perception better than anyone else in the palace. Every gesture was intentional, she said. Every tear, every pause, every look of vulnerability, it was rehearsed. The aide recalled long nights filled with tension, moments when Meghan's charm would crumble behind closed doors, replaced by what she called controlled chaos. Staffers walked on eggshells, unsure whether they would face gratitude or fury. She could move from tears to laughter in minutes, the aide confessed, her voice trembling. It wasn't about emotion, it was about control. Those words cut through the public's image of the Duchess like a knife. The woman who had once been hailed as the modernizer of the monarchy was now being painted as its manipulator. And yet, what truly rattled the palace was the aide's claim that Meghan had fabricated entire moments of victimhood to gain public sympathy. The crying incidents, the emotional breakdowns in the media, according to the aide, they were carefully placed dominoes. Each one designed to build a narrative of suffering and injustice, pushing public opinion away from the monarchy and toward Meghan's personal brand. She knew how to make people feel sorry for her, the aide added, but it was never spontaneous. It was strategy. As excerpts from the interview circulated online, the world began to fracture. Supporters clung to the belief that Meghan was misunderstood, while critics seized the confession as proof of manipulation. The media swarmed, analyzing every old clip, every quote, searching for inconsistencies. The Duchess's once untouchable image was starting to fade beneath a haze of suspicion. Inside Montecito, Harry was reportedly furious not at Meghan, but at the palace machine he believed was orchestrating the attack. Yet deep within, a quiet fear took root. What if even a fraction of it was true? What if the woman he had sworn to protect was not the victim he imagined, but the architect of her own storm? The cracks in public sympathy began to widen. Commentators who had once defended the Sussexes now hesitated. Old interviews resurfaced. Statements were re-examined. What had once been a tale of liberation was now being rewritten as manipulation. Harry's silence became its own story each day. Without a denial, only deepened the mystery. And through it all, the former aide stood by her words, refusing to retract a single syllable. But before the world could even process her words, a second insider came forward, someone from inside the royal communications team, and their evidence was explosive. For years, the palace IT system had quietly archived everything until someone ordered a wipe. The second whistleblower, a former communications officer, claimed to have saved copies of emails that could destroy Meghan's credibility. The messages allegedly showed calculated narratives sent to the media, contradicting the harassed outsider image. When these emails resurfaced, even Buckingham Palace was forced to reopen old wounds that had never fully healed. The revelation struck like lightning. This wasn't gossip whispered by disgruntled staff, this was evidence. The former communications officer, known for their meticulous record-keeping, came forward with a digital archive containing months of private correspondence between Meghan and her PR advisors. These emails, they claimed, outlined a deliberate strategy to manipulate public sentiment. They weren't the desperate cries of a misunderstood duchess. They were blueprints, detailed plans designed to control every headline, every emotional beat of her story. In one exchange, Meghan allegedly instructed her team to amplify tension between her and senior royals, ensuring sympathy tilted her way. The phrasing was cold, measured, and disturbingly precise. The emails also revealed coordination with select journalists, trusted names who had shaped the public narrative around her victimhood. The communications officer described late-night calls, last-minute edits, and media spin carefully orchestrated to paint Meghan as isolated, mistreated, and silenced. It was a devastating blow. For years, the Sussexes had claimed the palace machinery had crushed their voices. But now, the machinery seemed to reveal that Meghan had quietly been pulling her own levers behind the scenes. The whistleblower insisted they had kept the emails for protection, fearing retaliation if the truth ever surfaced. Their timing, however, suggested something else, perhaps revenge or redemption, depending on who was asked. Inside Buckingham Palace, panic began to spread. The discovery of a possible data breach sent security teams into overdrive. The idea that a former employee still possessed confidential royal communications was alarming enough. But what the messages contained was far worse. Senior aides held emergency meetings, assessing the risk of exposure and the potential fallout. The Queen's private secretary reportedly remarked that the scandal wasn't just about reputation, it was about trust collapsing from within. For an institution built on secrecy, the idea of internal betrayal was more dangerous than any external attack. Back in Montecito, Harry was furious. The moment he saw the headlines, he demanded answers. Meghan denied the allegations, insisting the messages had been taken out of context, that her words were twisted by people desperate to see her fall. But Harry wasn't convinced. Their arguments stretched late into the night, voices rising, accusations cutting deep. He had defended her endlessly to his family, to the public, even to himself. But the unease in his chest wouldn't fade. He asked her directly if any of it was true. Meghan's silence spoke louder than denial ever could. As the dawn approached, their once unbreakable partnership showed its first real fracture. The man who had given up his royal identity for love now faced a truth he couldn't ignore. The tension between loyalty and truth began to tear them apart. Every whisper, every glance carried suspicion. Trust, the very thing their new life had been built upon, was beginning to crumble. But while Harry questioned his wife's motives, the palace prepared to strike back with a move that would expose far more than just emails. When Buckingham Palace retaliates, it doesn't whisper, it roars. In an unprecedented move, senior aides began releasing fragments of context to the press, suggesting Meghan's so-called revelations were part of a larger deception. The monarchy had remained silent for years, but not this time. This was war, a quiet, royal war fought through briefings, coded statements, and devastating leaks that cornered the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The first response came subtly, a clarification issued to the media, carefully worded yet deadly in implication. Palace sources insisted that certain incidents Meghan described had been misinterpreted, hinting that there was far more to the story than the public knew. Behind the walls of Buckingham, strategy meetings intensified. The royal household, often accused of being slow to react, had suddenly turned into a communications fortress. Their objective wasn't revenge, it was control. They were determined to reclaim the narrative that had been slipping through their grasp ever since Harry and Meghan had broken away. Insiders began feeding carefully selected information to trusted journalists. Details once deemed too private for public release now found their way into print. Old staff accounts were revived, not through direct interviews, but through friends of the palace, ensuring the monarchy's hands appeared clean even as they struck hard. The once neutral press began to tilt, portraying Meghan as a manipulator and Harry as her misguided follower. One royal correspondent described it as the palace drawing blood without showing the knife. In the UK, public opinion began to fracture. Online, hashtags divided the kingdom, Team Meghan and Team Monarchy. Supporters clashed in endless debates, while talk shows turned every statement into a headline. The image of the Sussexes, once golden, now flickered with unease. Charities hesitated to partner. Media networks began questioning the couple's credibility. Slowly, deliberately, the palace's counterattack began to work. The Sussex brand, built on authenticity, was now synonymous with controversy. Inside Montecito, Harry's turmoil deepened. For years, he had fought for independence from the royal machine. But now, facing its calculated retaliation, he realized just how powerful that machine remained. Every press release, every anonymous source felt like a dagger aimed directly at his marriage. He tried to shield Meghan from the noise, but the headlines were relentless. He began to wonder whether this was punishment for leaving or for believing he could ever truly escape the crown's shadow. Then came Meghan's emotional response, an open statement condemning the smear campaign and reaffirming her truth. But the statement backfired. It was viewed as defensive, even desperate. The press dissected every word, and the palace remained unmoved, maintaining a silence that felt louder than any denial. The more she spoke, the weaker her position appeared. Every rebuttal seemed to strengthen the palace's grip on public sympathy. Within weeks, the tide had shifted completely. The monarchy, battered but unbroken, had regained control of the narrative. Their silence had evolved into a weapon, their subtlety into strength. But just as it seemed the royal institution had buried the Sussex scandal once and for all, something unexpected emerged, a forgotten recording, a voice from the past that would shatter everything Buckingham had rebuilt. And then, just as the palace believed they'd regained control, a hidden recording surfaced, one that turned speculation into undeniable proof. It was a simple voice memo recorded by accident during a private conversation in the royal residence. But when leaked to the press, its contents tore through both continents. Meghan's voice could be heard coaching a staff member to adjust timelines, reshape emotional accounts, and make it sound harsher for interviews. For Harry, it wasn't just a betrayal, it was the sound of everything he'd defended collapsing in a single heartbeat. The leak came at dawn, released by an anonymous online source before any publication could verify it. Within hours, the audio spread across social media like wildfire, dissected by journalists, replayed by commentators, and debated by millions. The voice was unmistakable calm, composed, and chillingly deliberate. Meghan could be heard instructing her assistant to focus on the optics and to make sure it lands emotionally. Her words, once celebrated as honest and vulnerable in televised interviews, now felt rehearsed, mechanical, even manipulative. The Duchess, who had captivated hearts with her authenticity, was suddenly facing an impossible accusation that her truth had been carefully manufactured. The palace, blindsided but cautious, did not immediately comment. Yet behind closed doors, confirmation came quickly. Several senior aides who had worked in the same wing during Meghan's tenure recognized the conversation and confirmed its timeline. The recording was real. What had once been rumor had now become undeniable proof. For Buckingham, it wasn't about scandal anymore. It was about vindication. Years of quiet restraint had finally turned into triumph. But the victory came with an uneasy silence. The monarchy's dignity demanded they let the evidence speak for itself. For Harry, however, the world stopped. Friends described him as numb, unable to comprehend how something so personal could be turned into public humiliation. He listened to the clip in disbelief, searching for a hint of fabrication, a splice, something that could explain it away. But the voice he heard was his wife's, unmistakable and unfiltered. Every defense he had ever made, every battle he'd fought against his own family, suddenly felt meaningless. The woman he'd sacrificed his royal life to protect now stood accused of orchestrating the very deception she'd sworn she'd suffered under. As the story spread, the reaction was immediate and brutal. The public, already divided, turned volatile. Hashtags trended globally. Supporters demanded compassion, claiming the clip was taken out of context. Critics, however, saw it as the final confirmation of deceit. Talk shows and news outlets replayed the memo endlessly, analyzing tone and intent with forensic obsession. Every pause, every sigh, every inflection became ammunition. What had begun as a whisper in Montecito had now become a global reckoning. Inside Meghan's team, chaos erupted. Her PR advisors scrambled to issue denials, then retractions, then statements of clarification. None of it mattered. The damage was done. The recording had pierced through every wall of protection, every layer of media polish. Silence from Buckingham only made it worse, allowing the world to fill the void with outrage and speculation. Meghan's empire of narrative control, built so carefully over years, was beginning to fracture under the weight of her own words. Harry's anguish grew unbearable. Friends claimed he shut himself off from everyone, refusing calls, avoiding messages, trapped between love and truth. He wanted to believe there was an explanation, but each new analysis, each confirmation, chipped away at that hope. For the first time, he began to question not the palace, not the press, but the woman he had once called his refuge. And as the storm raged, something unexpected began to move within the royal circle. A figure who had remained silent throughout the chaos was about to speak, A royal whose reputation for restraint made their words heavier than any scandal ever could. But before damage control could even begin, someone unexpected entered the battlefield, a royal whose silence had always spoken louder than words. Princess Anne had never been one for gossip, but she had been watching. Behind closed doors, she requested a private call with Harry, urging him to return home before the monarchy's foundation cracked completely. Her intervention wasn't emotional, it was prophetic. Anne knew the truth. Meghan had tried to bury, and she wasn't afraid to say it, even if it meant reigniting royal war. When word reached Anne about the leaked recording and the chaos it unleashed, she didn't seek counsel from advisors or courtiers. She didn't call a meeting or request approval from the king. Instead, she acted on instinct. The same instinct that had guided her through decades of royal storms. To her, this wasn't about scandal. It was about survival. Anne had witnessed enough deceit, enough manipulation, to recognize when the institution itself was in danger. And for the first time, she feared that the monarchy's undoing wasn't coming from outside pressure, but from within. The call between Anne and Harry was brief, but it cut deep. She didn't offer sympathy. She didn't cushion her words. Her voice, calm but unyielding, warned him that what was unfolding went beyond marriage drama or media warfare. "This is no longer about you," she told him. "It's about the crown. Every lie told in your name weakens what generations built. Come home before there's nothing left to come back to." For Harry, the words were like cold steel, measured, logical, and painfully true. But beneath that restraint, he could sense something else. Fear. Not for herself, but for the monarchy's very structure. Anne had always understood the delicate balance between duty and emotion. She knew when to stay silent, and when silence itself became complicity. By reaching out, she broke an unspoken code, one that royals lived by. Never interfere, never confront directly. Yet she did both, because she had seen through Meghan long before anyone dared to say it aloud. In her view, Meghan's deception had extended far beyond the media. It had infiltrated the very narrative of the royal legacy. And the recording, to Anne, was not a scandal. It was a symptom of rot. Harry listened, torn between love and loyalty. His aunt's words echoed in his mind long after the call ended. He wanted to dismiss them, to label them as traditional paranoia. But deep down, he knew Anne wasn't one for exaggeration. Her insight was brutal because it was accurate. She saw the cracks forming beneath the throne, the quiet panic spreading through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. What frightened him most was her tone. It wasn't angry. It was certain. Meghan, upon learning about Anne's intervention, reacted with visible resentment. To her, it was interference, a jealous intrusion by a woman who had never accepted her. She viewed Anne's warning as an attempt to reclaim control, not to protect the institution. "She's afraid of me," Meghan reportedly said, "because I changed the story and she can't undo it." The divide between Meghan and the royal family, once political, had now become deeply personal. In response to the escalating chaos, the royal household tightened its operations. Senior aides were reassigned, digital archives reviewed, and a quiet internal review began. Unofficially, it was said to be Anne's doing a final attempt to secure what was left of the monarchy's dignity. The royal family was preparing for a reckoning, and Anne had positioned herself as its quiet enforcer. But as Harry sat alone, replaying his aunt's words, his confusion only deepened. For every accusation against Meghan, there was a memory of her pain, her sincerity, her isolation. Could all of it have been an illusion? The conflict tore at him, pulling his loyalty in two directions toward the family that raised him and the woman who redefined his life. Yet Anne's warning refused to fade. It lingered like a prophecy, a quiet reminder that something even darker was still waiting to surface. But Anne's call only intensified Harry's confusion until one final revelation made everything clear. A name he never expected to hear again. The final blow didn't come from a journalist. It came from someone inside Meghan's own circle. A former friend, silenced by NDAs and fear, stepped forward with a confession that connected every thread. They revealed Meghan's long-term plan to manipulate public sympathy, seize narrative control, and weaponize personal stories against the royals. It wasn't coincidence. It was orchestration. And Harry, the man who gave up everything for love, was the last to know. When the former friend came forward, the world wasn't prepared for the magnitude of what they revealed. This wasn't just another insider trading stories for fame. It was someone who had been there from the beginning. Before the palace walls, before the Netflix deals, before the headlines. Their words painted a timeline of deliberate construction, a years-long operation designed to craft an image, one that blurred the lines between truth and performance. According to them, Meghan had envisioned her public narrative long before the royal exit was even conceived. Every interview, every leak, every calculated silence, the friend confessed, was part of a larger design. It wasn't reaction, it was strategy. Emails, contracts, and private correspondences began to surface, each one hinting at a deeper level of control than anyone imagined. The friend revealed that after joining the royal family, Meghan had secretly retained PR consultants outside the Buldno-Verstheim Palace's official channels. Their role was to ensure her image remained separate, untouchable, modern, and independent from royal influence. Staff members who questioned her directives were reportedly silenced with legal agreements. Others, too frightened to resist, followed orders that blurred ethical lines. She was always 2 steps ahead, the friend continued. Even when she looked cornered, she had already planned her next move. Perhaps the most devastating revelation came when the friend quoted Meghan's own justification for it all. It's survival, not deceit. Those 5 words tore through the narrative she had built. To her, control wasn't manipulation, it was protection. She believed she was fighting a monarchy that had already decided her fate. But to the world, and to Harry, it was something else entirely, a cold admission that blurred love, ambition, and betrayal. For years, Meghan had presented herself as the victim of royal cruelty. Now, her own words suggested that the cruelty might have been mutual, if not calculated. For Harry, the confession was unbearable. Friends said he sat in silence for hours, refusing to speak. The realization that his wife's most heartfelt confessions could have been rehearsed broke something inside him that even exile hadn't touched. His tears, once private, became the image of a man torn between devotion and devastation. For years, he had fought everyone who doubted her. Now, even he didn't know what to believe. The confrontation that followed between them was quiet, but final. Meghan defended herself fiercely, claiming she did what she had to do to survive the institution's suffocating power. "You don't understand what they would have done to me," she told him. But to Harry, it no longer mattered who the enemy was. The war had already consumed them both. The confession rippled across the globe. News anchors called it the collapse of the Sussex illusion. Royal correspondents described it as the most damaging revelation since the abdication crisis. Social media ignited with disbelief and fury, half the world condemning Meghan, the other half defending her with renewed passion. But for the royal family, it was vindication wrapped in tragedy. What had started as a scandal had evolved into a generational reckoning, one that questioned not just the monarchy's resilience, but the cost of rebellion itself. And as the cameras turned away and statements were issued, one image remained. The prince who traded a crown for love now faced the ruins of both. The palace had won the narrative, but at a cost too heavy to celebrate. Meghan's empire trembled, Harry's loyalty shattered, and the monarchy stood taller, but colder. But in the quiet aftermath, as cameras turned away and statements were issued, one question remained unanswered. What would Harry do next? When the lights fade and the world moves on, the real story begins. In the solitude of their California home, Harry sits by the window, staring into the fading sun. The empire they built on truth now stands on shattered glass. Yet, amid the ruins, Harry makes one final decision, a choice that could either redeem or destroy him forever. Because when lies collapse, the only thing left standing is the man brave enough to face them. The world had turned its gaze elsewhere, but the echoes of scandal still lingered in Montecito's silence. What once felt like freedom now felt like exile. Harry's days were marked not by press briefings or public statements, but by silence, an unbearable, heavy quiet that made him question everything. He replayed every decision, every defense, every moment he had chosen love over legacy. In his mind, it all blurred together, the vows, the interviews, the tears, but one truth rose above the noise. He had built his life on a story he no longer believed. The fairy tale had fractured, and behind it was a man torn between guilt and longing, love and loss. The distance between him and Meghan had grown invisible but unmistakable. Once bound by their shared defiance, they now moved like strangers, tethered by regret. Conversations turned brief, glances avoided. The woman who once inspired him to walk away from everything he knew now seemed unreachable, wrapped in her own walls of justification and denial. For Meghan, the world's judgment had become background noise. In her final public statement, she dismissed the revelations as distortions driven by fear. She spoke with calm defiance, insisting that history would vindicate her. But the tone was different now, less conviction, more exhaustion. Her words felt hollow, echoing across an audience that no longer listened. In London, the palace offered no gloating remarks. There were no celebrations, no public declarations of victory. Instead, there was silence, a dignified, almost mournful quiet. The Queen's legacy had survived another storm, but at a terrible cost. Behind the royal composure, there was grief not for reputation, but for the family that had broken beyond repair. Charles, now weary and reflective, was said to have confided to a close advisor that every truth, no matter how painful, has its own mercy. It was a sentiment Anne understood all too well. For her, this wasn't triumph, it was tragedy restrained by duty. And yet, Harry's decision would prove that redemption sometimes comes in silence, not speeches. Without fanfare, without press, he boarded a plane to London. Alone. No entourage, no cameras, not even a statement. It wasn't a return to royalty, it was a return to truth. He wasn't seeking forgiveness from the monarchy, he was seeking it from himself. The journey was less about geography and more about conscience. A man walking back into the very institution he had condemned, not to reclaim his title, but to face what he had abandoned. As he stood once more within the shadows of the land that shaped him, Harry realized that the war he had fought for, love had left no victors, only survivors. Meghan remained behind, her empire fragile, her conviction shaken. The world that once cheered for their defiance now whispered of its consequences. And in that quiet reckoning, Harry understood the cost of truth, that it frees, but it also burns. And so, the curtain falls not on a royal scandal, but on a love story rewritten by truth. Because in the end, even a prince must face the kingdom within himself. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.